So, in the continuing series, based on Stanley Cup winners, we looked at 3 Islanders teams first. Now, we are up to the 3rd Oilers Stanley Cup. This is when they officially became a dynasty. It takes 3 cups in 4 years to become a dynasty. So if Pittsburgh didn't do it this year and they do it next year, they're a dynasty. It's quite the lineup. But in 86, they get eliminated in the first round. So between 85 and 87, there was some turnover. Guys who have their names etched on the Stanley Cup, who were not a part of the 85 Stanley Cup. Jeff Bukaboo, who did not play in the playoffs, but since he played more than half of the regular season games, he gets his name on the Stanley Cup. Kelly Buchberger, Mo LeMay, of Canuck fame, of course, played 10 games during the regular season and had 1 goal. In the playoffs, he played 9 games and had 2 goals. So he was more productive in the playoffs than the regular season. That would feel pretty good for him to get his name on the Stanley Cup. Craig Mctavish, famously, of course, his career ends in Boston. He spends a year away from the game. I'm not getting into what happened there. It's, an incident that's been talked about to death. Comes back into the league and is victorious in his first year back with the Oilers. He fit the Oilers like a glove. He really did. Marty McSorley, who's universally loved and respected. Craig Muni, who actually is universally loved and respected. Kent Nilsson. I've made my opinions on Nilsson known before, but Nilsson does have his name on a Stanley Cup. Reijo Ristolainen, one of my favorite names back in the 80s. When Reijo came over and started playing hockey, I was very excited. And then he was an Oiler, and I was less excited. But that name being on a Stanley Cup, whoever etched it on there probably had writer's cramp after. And Steve Smith, famously. When the Oilers win the Stanley Cup in 1987, Gretzky hands the cup to Steve Smith first. Steve Smith, of course, infamously puts the puck into his own net. And in doing so, the Oilers were unable to come back and beat Calgary. So this is the year after that. One other, I don't know why he's not in the list of new players. Tikkanen was also added in between 85 and 87, I believe. No, I'm wrong. Tikkanen was on the 85 team as well. So, there's your new guys. And a lot of toughness in there. And a lot of hard-nosed players. The Oilers definitely toughened themselves up in between 85 and 87. Regular season, Gretzky dominates still, 183 points. Curry's a distant second with 108. Messier, 107. Tikkanen, 78. Anderson, 73. Coffey had 67 points in 59 games. Coffey's already hit his offensive peak. And criticism of Coffey started getting a lot louder around this time, and he wouldn't be an Oiler for much longer. He famously would end up in Pittsburgh and kind of play well there and enjoy playing with Lemieux. You think about it, Paul Coffey had a very lucky career. He plays with Gretzky, and then, I'm going to get traded. Oh, I got to play with Lemieux? Really? Yeah, it's a pretty good career for him. Now, in the playoffs, they play 21 games because the first round's now best of 7. This is when best of 7 comes in. They beat LA in 5. They sweep Winnipeg again. That had to be rough for Jets fans. And then they beat Detroit in 5. And I was very upset that year. I really wanted Detroit to knock out Edmonton. I was like, all right, come on, Stevie Yzerman. Let's go, Yzerman. I was an Yzerman fan. And I really wanted to see them beat him, and they didn't. Detroit, I thought, had a very good team, but Edmonton didn't have a lot of problem with Detroit. Edmonton didn't have much of a problem with Philly until they did. So they win the first game 4-2. They win the second game 3-2. They lose the third game 5-3, and they win the fourth game 4-1. They're up 3-1. Then Hextall started playing like Hextall. Beats them 4-3. Beats them 3-2. The night that shook the Spectrum was Game 6. And then Game 7, the Oilers do what teams do to Cinderella teams, and they win 3-1. The Conn Smythe is awarded to Ron Hextall. Now, Hextall's an interesting story because, of course, The Philadelphia organization had gone through the loss of Pelle Lindbergh not too long before this. Pelle Lindbergh was a fantastically talented goaltender who was in a car crash traveling at high speeds, and he passed away. So here are the Flyers with this Hextall kid, and Hextall was just as good in my eyes as Pelle Lindbergh. Lindbergh was awesome, but so was Hextall. And I think because Hextall stayed in the league for a while after he wasn't one of the better goalies in the league, and he tried to stick around as long as he could, I think that kind of diminished the opinion of some of what he did earlier in his career, but not for me. For me, he is still the best puck-handling goaltender that we ever saw, the most vicious goaltender that I ever saw, and to me, he always seemed like a really popular team guy, wherever he ended up. But this is where his legend started. And before him, Roger Crozier with the Wings, Glenn Hall with St. Louis, Reggie Leach with Philly were the only three who'd won a Conn Smythe Trophy in a losing cause. J.S. Shiger would join that club in 2003 with the Anaheim Ducks, or the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim as they were called then. So Ron Hextall wins the Conn Smythe, even though Gretzky has 34 points in 21 games. Messier has 28, Anderson 27, Curry 25. And there's Kent Nilsson with 19. So in this playoffs, Nilsson played relatively well. I don't think, though, that he was on the next Stanley Cup winner. No, he's not down here. No. And there are some surprising games on the team that I'll talk about tomorrow, the 88 team. There's going to be a couple of guys you go, wait, they played for Edmonton and won a Stanley Cup? Yep. Penalty minutes are interesting. So Tikkanen at 120. I would imagine 60 of those penalty minutes are because referees couldn't understand what the hell he was saying and just wanted him off the ice for a couple minutes so they could just breathe. Tikkanen spoke a combination of Finnish, English, and mushmouth, and it was called Tikish or Tikanese, and nobody understood what he said. It was great fun for Gretzky when they were teammates. Gretzky enjoyed it less when Tikkanen was still in Edmonton and Gretzky was in L.A., and Tikkanen's following him around talking in Tikish, and Gretzky's losing his mind because he'd just talk and hassle. And that was the kind of player Tikkanen was. So 120 penalty minutes, not a surprise for a guy who aggravates the opposition as much as he does. Sean Avery has nothing on Esa Tikkanen. Kevin McClellan, 238 penalty minutes. Steve Smith with 165. It's easy to forget that Steve Smith was a pretty tough, hard-nosed defenseman. Bukaboom, 124, of course. And McSorley with 159. The surprise is Kelly Buchberger is not over 100 penalty minutes that season. So he didn't make this chart. But Marty McSorley at 159, of course. And 100 of that is probably just the referee going, you're in the box. And Marty going, why? I know what you're going to do. Get in the box. You're in there for the next 5. And if you argue with me, it's a game, and you're out of here. It was a rough bunch. Very talented, very deep, rough bunch. The Oilers, everybody talks about the Semenko era, and the Semenko era was one thing, but then they got tougher in between the 85 and the 87 Stanley Cups. And 88, more depth and adding to their dynasty. It was the only series to go to Game 7 since 1971. Or the first series to go 7 games since 1971. Of course, as years have gone by, there's been more Stanley Cups that have gone to 7 games. But it was a rarity in that day and age. I think momentum played such a huge role in the playoffs. And you didn't have instant replays. You couldn't go over game film, so teams would just run you over. They'd figure it out. They'd win a game, and then they just go, well, we'll just keep doing that. And there wasn't as many shifts and changes. Defensive situations were handled completely differently by coaching. It was a much more freewheeling game. The one thing that I'll say for 80s hockey in comparison to now, yeah, it's sloppy and it's slow, but to me the most talented team always won. That isn't always the case now, but, and before Pittsburgh fans say anything, yes, you're the most talented team in the league. But back then, it was just the most talented team would win. And for teams that didn't have the talent up front, they didn't have the elite talent, they were dead in the water. And now with the way the NHL is and with the way defense is coached and the way that all this is done, you can be a pretty iffy team with elite talent up front and still be in the hunt for the playoffs and possibly make the playoffs. You would have got killed by these guys, though. Great team. This is the third Stanley Cup, and yes, the Oilers have 5 of them, so I still have 2 more to discuss. They get broken up, but that's not for today, and it's not for tomorrow. Let me know what you guys think in the comments section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you again soon.